Welcome to Church Planting and Renewal Conversations. I'm Chris Vogel, Director of Next Gen Pastors, and I'm M&A's newly appointed Church Planting and Vitality Coordinator. And with me today is Vincent Tauriello, M&A's Coaching Specialist, and we welcome you to today's webinar, The Power of Reflection in Ministry. How do you best capture a year's learning and prepare for the ministry year to come? It's been said that action without reflection is stagnation, while action with reflection is growth. In the Psalms, we see a pattern of reflection, looking back to give thanks and gathered lessons learned, joined with looking ahead in faith to God's gracious leading. Well, in this webinar, we will coach you through a simple process of reflection that will help you to end stronger and begin clearer. Tell us a little bit more, Vincent.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everyone. Yeah, it's such a key element to life, and particularly life in ministry. Broadly, I think typically most leaders spend 90% of their time in action, doing. And on a high side, about 10% of their time is spent on reflection in terms of, how was that? How did that go? Garnering some input from those around them to try to understand, what was that like? What's it like to be following me? What was it like to be in that meeting I was leading? Things like that. And I think broadly, the importance of reflection has been gaining traction and recognition, and the results are clear that it does lead to growth and learning, better learning. And we see this pattern throughout the Psalms, and particularly one of them that I've been noticing recently is in Psalm 90, where Moses talks about the Lord being our dwelling place in all generations. So he's reflecting back over time. And then he's looking forward in faith, asking God, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom, which in a sense is, help me to learn, help me to apply the lessons learned so that I don't keep, making the same mistakes or get stagnated like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, good. But it kind of help us get an idea of where we're at in this whole process. And we have a poll here. We want to know not what you think it should be, but how would you describe your present practice of reflection? You can think about it in terms of daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly, however it works best for you. And so the poll here, you should be able to see it. Begin and click this. It's a single choice. What one would most describes your reality in this whole process? There's no right or wrong answer. We're not going to track you down if you don't give the answer we want you to give. We just want to be able to hear what your thoughts are in this. You have anyone? We were talking earlier, and you were mentioning the whole thing about kind of industry standard of leaders. There's 90% action, 10% reflection, and part of me stopped and went, I don't know if that was really my practice or what I've seen with others. And it's weird because we're built for this. This is what our life is all about. I would have thought we are interior processors, thinkers. We might be processing verbally. That's a whole nother thing. But, our whole life is making those connections. And so I wonder if pastors fall in the same category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in that conversation, we were going back and forth about the difference between contemplation and reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I would think I know in my own practice in ministry, I did a fair bit of contemplation,
right, but
not as much reflection until later on.
Yeah.
When, a good coach came alongside of me and said, well, have you thought about, what lessons you've learned from this past year? And I was like, well, I just kind of got through the year. I was glad to get through it.
Yeah.
I don't know what lessons. And, she led me through some reflective practice that was so helpful moving forward.
And I think that is, yeah. And we'll, as we flesh out, what do we mean by reflection, that will help, because we should be doing contemplation. If we're not, then there's problems. So when I'm in a text preparing a sermon, working on a Bible study, there's a lot of contemplation. But the reflection, as I think I was thinking, contemplation is thinking more about where I'm at now, where do I want to go, perhaps, especially in the text. But reflection has I think a longer range aspect to it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, we have a good number responded, and so what do we? Oh, can you see that? I'll end the poll now. I think, and then I share the results. There we go. Should be able to see them. So 60% say I just wing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that bears what you were referring to.
Yeah. I think a lot of us, that's where a lot of us are. And then, sure, I write out my accomplishments and my disappointments, pray through them. The next, I schedule time with my session or key leaders for reflection. I mean, it could be a year-end job review, which is good, but not quite reflect, because job review can be very performance oriented, and it should involve, I think, this kind of reflection. But and then 2 say I work with a coach to reflect and then seek to apply my learning moving forward in the month, quarter, or new year. So yeah, what do you think of that?
Well, I think it confirms our suspicion that it is a need, that it's not as widespread as it could be, and so that means that there's room for growth, and that what we have to share might be of help.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I'm not totally surprised, but I am a little surprised. And I would say for a lot of my life, it was just wing it. I am so busy that to stop and reflect, and some of it's the way I'm wired. The phrase, I've used often wrong, but never in doubt. My wife has asked me, what events in your life would you do differently? And I stop and go, maybe one, and it's not marrying you. That's no. I don't always think about it, and so yeah. As I've gotten older, I've had to stop and force myself to really kind of walk through that, which I think is really important. It's something that gets back to the issues that we talk about, emotional intelligence, because reflection is going to force me to face good and feel good about what's good, but also what I've missed or didn't hit the way I should have, and not allow that to be a point to beat myself up on or what have you.
Yeah. And as we mentioned earlier in our conversation, our predisposition toward one or the other could really cloud our judgment, and we can lose objectivity and really gain some of the benefits of it. If we're too harsh with ourselves or too easy with ourselves,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I think that's good.
So I'm wondering, are there any questions or thoughts that are emerging for our audience today at this point before we forge forward? If you do have a question or a comment, please feel free to post those in the chat.
Yeah, throw them up there. You can use the Q&A box. You can use the chat box if there's anything as you went through this that stood out to you. As they're thinking about that, Vincent, what's the difference between number 4 and 5 in that poll? Between the questions of scheduling a time with my session or key leaders, or having a coach in that process. And again, it's not a right or wrong, but I think there's some differences there. What are some of the things that your leadership team, your session can help you with? What are some things that a coach can help you with that a session may not?
Yeah, it's a good question. We can bat that back and forth a little bit. I think one thing for sure is your session is going to have a vested interest, more so than a coach would. So there, you might feel more safe to kind of bring out any number of things that you might not feel so safe to bring out. Not that you're going to be attacked or anything, but there might be a greater comfort level. And with that objectivity and skill set, I think you might gain a greater depth of insight as you do the reflection with a coach.
With a coach, as
someone
opposed
who doesn't have a vested interest and is trained really to listen and not necessarily to judge or to critique, which I think supervisors have a role in that, right?
Yeah. No, and they should. So yeah, it's not necessarily an either or to avoid the one, but I think knowing the objectivity issue, it is harder. It gets to the aspect we sometimes refer to as allies and confidants. A session, we're allies. We're working towards a common good and a common goal. But a confidant there's a sense of trust and ability to share without fear of judgment. A coach is not going to fire you. They might say this isn't going anywhere because you're not listening, you're not engaging. That's a whole other issue. Right. But a session, to be able to say to a session, if I reflect back with my session, say, I did not engage them in a healthy relational sense that was for their spiritual good. Now, if I lay that in front of them, if they don't sense it's improved, they're going to think I'm not trying. I'd be a little scared, maybe, to say that if I didn't have a plan to work with right away.
Yeah. I think another added benefit of having someone outside of an organization is that in terms of creative solutions and strategy, they say that the first 1, 2, or 3 solutions that you come up with are sort of standard. They're low shelf, but a coach will push you to go a little bit further. And it's usually the 4th, 5th, and 6th ones that can be the real gold.
Yeah. Right. And that does take some time and effort, but you got to allow that process to flow.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point to remember. It's not going to be the first thing that comes to mind. It's going to be you haven't finished reflecting if you go, oh yeah, here's something, and then move on. No.
Yeah.
Is there mention action without reflection is stagnation, especially in our culture, Western culture. Action is key, and so can maybe help me think a bit more. Can you give me some examples? Why is it stagnation? I'm doing. I mean, how's that stagnation? I'm being active. I'm producing. Why would you say that's stagnation?
Well, typically when we're in production mode, we're basically producing the same thing.
Okay.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So where is the new insight? Where is the development in your own skill set?
Okay.
Where is there in pushing yourself past, your comfort zone, if you will, or your limitations? Typically that will not happen if there's not an impetus, some grist, to make that happen.
Good. Okay. Yep. I have a question here. And maybe we'll get to this a little bit later. Let me just read it out. What process do you go through when you set aside time or times to reflect?
Well, that's a great question that I think we'll clearly answer.
Okay.
In the content of the webinar, especially the last section where we use the end of the year reflection process. But that's a great question. Yeah,
no, and there is a process. It can't just be, I'm here at my desk. Okay, set aside, sit here a little while, take a nap, maybe. Okay, I've reflected. There are some good steps that we'll cover in a moment.
Yeah, maybe that's a good push for us to get into a little bit more of the content.
All right. Well, good. And again, for those who are attending, please send us questions, and we can get to them now. Some of them might be dealt with later, but in the Q&A box or in the chat box, please post the questions. Well, let's talk about this idea of generating feedback. Talk about the power of reflection. What are some of the things we should be thinking about in doing that?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So I want to give you two tools and one concept to help you in your reflective practice. And one of the ways to engage in reflection for yourself and with others is this idea, Chris just mentioned it, called generating feedback. And we're using this acronym WIN, W-I-N. And so, this can be used as you look at your day, just reflecting on your day, your week, an event that you just were a part of, a meeting, a conversation. It could also be used in terms of supervision if you have somebody who you're supervising or mentoring. And this is how it goes. The first question, the W, is, what did you do well? And so as you reflect on your day, as you reflect on that conversation, as you ask your supervisee or your mentee, this question, what did you do well? It provides an opportunity to reflect on something that's often overlooked. And that is the positive, if you will. What did I actually do well there? The second question is the I, what would you improve? So as you reflect on your day, as you reflect on the week, the event, you help your supervisee. This provides an opportunity to reflect on an area of weakness, an area that needs improvement. Maybe it's a failure or something that needs further development. And then the third question, and these are in the order that they're in purposely. The third question deals with, what do you want to remember next time? So this is sort of pulling together the lessons here, the what I did well, what would I improve? How do I take that and apply that as I move forward in this role, in this relationship? A lot of what pastors do, as I did it for many years, is self-manage. You have to learn how to self-manage, right? And reflection is critical, because if you don't do that, it's really hard to know where you are and the progress that you're making. Paul talked to Timothy about the importance of making progress. See that you're making progress, not perfection. Yeah. And it's really hard to gauge that if you're not doing any reflection. So this is a tool that you can use to practice some reflection in a simple way. You don't have to wait until the end of the year to do this. And I'll give an example, unless there's some questions coming in. But I was working with a client not too long ago, and the subject of preaching came up, as it often does. And he asked, well, can we review one of my sermons together? I need some help with preaching. I said, sure, of course. So I set it up so that he listened to a sermon he preached, and I listened to that same sermon. And then when we came together, I walked him through this win. And first of all, he was so relieved, because I didn't come, with 30 things that need, changing and all this kind of stuff. It's not very helpful. But even when it came down to him reflecting on what he did well, he was struggling. He was not in the practice of doing that. And so when I gave him some I wasn't trying to blow smoke. I think you did this well and that well and so on. And then that gave a platform for when it was time to give the improvements, after he said, yeah, I think I could have improved, my application, my illustrations, things like that. Mm-hmm. I said, yeah, I would agree. And I noticed this too. And it took the tension down so many notches, because we started off in a more cordial, friendly kind of way than me coming in guns a-blazing. Here's the list, of everything you did wrong. And so that's just an example of how that can be used to good effect.
I had shared, Vincent, when we were talking earlier, of a situation. It was a guy who was a different denomination, but he was visiting a church and was watching a children's ministry leader at work with young 6-year-olds, and He went through the win process with this person. So, okay, what did you do well? And the children ministry leader said, yeah, I think this part of, getting kids engaged and interactive, I think that went well. What would you improve? He said, I really lost them here. I talk too long. They're too young. I shouldn't be talking that much. We've got to get them interacting. They can't. What do you want to remember the next time? He said, well, if you notice, I have some friends here with me, and I want to get them engaged so that they're learning to do it as well. And the guy said, this ministry leader is thinking through it. The ministry leader was 12 years old, which was what was this guy just said. It blew my mind. This 12-year-old had the ability, and he said to him, he said, I want to talk, I want to keep you and I want to keep in touch with you over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, because you're going to be a church planter. You're going to be a pastor. This is something that's amazing. It was a great skill, and he had a love for ministry at that point. But it's not that complex. I mean, if in the sense that if a 12-year-old can do it, I think in some ways we're almost programmed not to, like you mentioned with the fellow with the sermon. I can't tell you what I did well, because that would be prideful. Well, if that's if you live there only, yeah, then pride's gonna be an issue. But if you can't identify the good, then you're not going to know where to really keep working at or feel good about. And you probably won't want to be able to say where you need to improve either.
That's right. That's right.
No, that's good.
That's good.
Great. Well, there's a question here from Philip. I've heard the term coaching, if we've been using it, and that's is kind of the concept, the term we use. But this says, I have 2 friends who are going through a year-long course with the goal of being certified as spiritual directors. I've also heard this referred to as spiritual listening. Are these the same things? Thanks. How would you answer that?
The simple answer is no.
Okay. So what's the similarity? What's the difference? Because there's listening and coaching. There's going to be a spiritual element, but how would you describe them?
So I'm not a spiritual director, and I've never taken that course, so I can't speak to it per se. I think you're right. I think the same skills for counseling, mentoring, spiritual direction, the listening, asking good questions, I think they're there. My understanding is that spiritual direction is more of somewhat of a mystical looking to God for direction, and the director is sort of a guide to help you back to God and to wait on him. I don't know if I'm representing that accurately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, part of it is recognize that when we think of coaching, not that it can be, or it could be much more task geared to a task. I'm doing this, how can I do this better? How can I set some SMART goals? How can I, but there is a strong emphasis on, obviously, the spiritual component. How am I interacting with the gospel here? What does this look like? So yeah, in our context, we often, this is not a right or wrong, but the vocabulary we use within our tradition in the PCA, while you hear more and more of spiritual directors in the context of churches, we don't use that phrase as much, not because there's a right or wrong necessarily. It's just not part of our tradition as much.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah. And I would say with coaching, it's not simply goal oriented. It's both the personal and the professional development. So it's developing one's character, calling, and competencies in the context of ministry, if it's ministry coaching.
Yeah. No, good. All right. Well, what's next on our topic here?
So I think at this stage we want to launch the PowerPoint where we're able to look at this action reflection cycle. I talked about giving 2 tools. So the first tool was that generating feedback using WIN. This is more of the concept that I wanted to share. And so you can see the graphic there that this is a cycle for reflection. and you can start at either point. So you can start at the action part of it or the reflection part. But in each case, after the action or before the action, there can be reflection. As you think about reflecting, before you go into action. So there's a cycle here that enables reflection to occur in the context of not just 90% action, but about as close as you can. If you could do 50-50, that would be ideal. Between the two.
And how fast do you go through that cycle, would you say? I mean, how often? Because when we scheduled this, we're thinking, year-end reflection. So if I do this once a year while I'm doing it, how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like if you only give a year-end review to somebody, it's a little late. Yeah. Because they can't remedy anything at that point except in the new year. So the more frequent that you can do it, the better. So a daily reflection is a great place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
okay.
and to practice it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to look at each of these individually. So let's look at action first. So when you think about action, it's not simply getting something done, but in our doing, in our action, the more we can think about acquiring and applying new behaviors in that action, in new situations, new ways, the greater chance there will be that there'll be learning and development. So, for example, trying a new behavior or experimenting with something or pushing your comfort zone. So I put up there like a new meeting agenda, for example. So trying out, what if I put the prayer at the top and the decisions later, or just trying something out. Or what if I took more time beforehand to prep for this meeting? Would that change things? Or what if I handed this over to somebody else in the meeting to lead this segment? What would happen there? So it's trying things a little bit differently to see if it benefits the overall outcome and fruitfulness of what you're doing. So along the same lines is not just being in your own head, but seeking the input and ideas of others, whether that's a coach or the people around you for advice or feedback, reading widely or observing others. Finding ways to get some input on, one of the things I work a lot with my clients on is leading meetings, because meetings can be the end of us, or they can be highly, highly beneficial, right?
Yeah.
And leading an effective meeting is an art as well as a skill. And you have to know your audience, you have to know what the outcomes are that you want. And you have to know your strengths of leading and how you can bring those to bear upon the group experience.
Mm-hmm. So I'm hearing here, when I hear action, I can easily picture just the end result, what's happening at my goal there. But there's a lot of action that leads to that. And so the reflection has to be not just at the end point, but the steps leading to it. And I think those steps leading to it, we are less conscious of those. We do them more reflectively, and all we think about is, oh, that meeting went poorly. Does that make sense then?
Right on. And you can see in the next slide, when we talk about reflection, we're talking about reflection before the action, right? So being intentional, generating action plans. What's the desired goal and outcome of this meeting? I often ask, a client that who's going into a meeting, what's the outcome that you want? And they'll almost always say, what a great question. Well, yeah, I mean, it's important to think about that. It may not come, but you've given it enough thought and your context very well to be able to set some of those in motion. So there's reflection before the action. You could actually do some reflection in action. So there's what you're saying and what's happening, and paying attention to that. Noting, you mentioned EQ earlier, emotional intelligence, like noting what's the impact, what's going on, what's on the faces, what's in the tone, as I ask this question, or if I raise this issue.
Mm-hmm.
Stepping back to observe the big picture. And then we've already mentioned this, the after action review.
Mm-hmm.
What did I do and what happened when I did that? What did someone else say and what happened in the room? Did it suck all the air out of the room? when we were talking about this heated subject, to mask or not to mask, that is the question, something like that. And then just kind of trying to think about, are there underlying patterns here within the dynamics between us or in the way we do business together, and try to generate some kind of hypothesis. What can I gain from this? What can I do about that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sean asked a question here. How do you help people who aren't naturally reflective or even contemplative become more contemplative and reflective? So someone's coming to you for help, but this is not they are not reflectively reflective, I guess. It's just not in their skill set. How do you get them there?
Well, it reminds me of that funny movie that Bill Murray was in, Baby Steps.
Yeah. What about Bob?
Yeah, What About Bob? That you take a small step, right? On your let's take your day off. How was your day off? What went well with your day off? I took a walk. That was good. I got out. What didn't go so well? What would you have improved? Yeah, well, I looked at too many emails. I really should have just pulled away. Okay. And then, next time, what do you want to do differently? Yeah, I think maybe I'll just, turn the phone off or turn the computer off for the day.
Yeah.
That something simple like that gets you in the pool, and not just on the outside looking at the water to decide whether you're going to jump in or not.
Yeah. So it sounds then like, a good coach, someone who's well trained, it's about asking the right questions to help them take those steps that we don't have to naturally be able to do it ourselves to be able to get to that healthy goal.
Yeah, but I think the goal is, any good coach or any good helper wants to work themselves out of a job, and after a while, the training wheels need to be on for a little while, and then you take them off.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Good.
Yeah.
All right. Ready for the next?
So then, just in conclude, if you wouldn't mind, then in terms of conclusion, as I mentioned earlier, Paul's advice to Timothy is to see that he makes progress, right? And so, we're framing this not that this is just a really good idea, but we want to grow, right? We want to mature. We want to be impactful in our ministries and faithful in those, and you can maximize your own development, your own impact, by employing something like these action reflection cycles, and sort of pushing yourself to grow, to challenge yourself really to grow, because you don't really grow if you just do the same thing over and over and over again, right? You have to kind of push yourself out of that comfort zone. Again, going back to preaching, trying a different kind of introduction. Maybe people have gotten lulled into the same introduction over and over and over again. They're not even listening. So trying a different type of introduction, or going to a 2-point sermon instead of a 3-point, every once in a while, just to try. Does that work? Does that help the listener get the point? Does that help the preacher maybe be sharper and cleaner in saying what the text says, and applying it the way the text is meant to be applied?
And you probably won't lose your ordination credentials if you do that. Probably.
Yeah. And I did want to mention that all of at least this action reflection cycle, this is from David Peterson, who was responsible for basically revolutionizing Google in its internal coaching programs. and quite a few others. I took a course with him that was to help me go from being a good coach to a great coach. And it was so helpful. And he said, the coaches that he works with, the leaders he works with, the more they engage in reflection is the degree that they grow and provide greater benefit to those they serve. And of course, that won me right away. I was all in after that.
Yeah, it is amazing for those of us or those listening, serving as pastors. Our whole life is, at least in theory, is helping people to reflect more, who they are before the God who made them, and reflecting on the God that's made them, and how are they to live in light of that, and to see their sin, to reflect on the depth of it, but also reflect on the power of God's grace and mercy in Christ who died and rose again. So in a sense, this should be normal for us, but it's not. I think we really do struggle doing it ourselves in a way.
Yeah.
So good.
So this last tool that I'd like to give is, a couple years ago, I decided, I'd like to give all of my clients a gift. And so I came up with this format to do some end of the year reflecting, and we can walk through this to kind of get a feel for it. We're going to include this in the follow-up email so you can have a copy for yourself. It would be, I think, unrealistic to think that we would get through it all in this short period of time, or gain some major insights. Who knows, though, right? Maybe some will come. So I'd love to just kind of walk through this. And there's two parts to it. There's the looking back on the year past, and then there's looking forward to the year ahead. And really, you could trim it down and make it, looking back on your day or your week or your quarter. So you could trim it down to a smaller bite size, but right here I have it in the year because we're coming up on the end of the year. So the first thing that you would do as you look back on the year is to list your biggest wins, your biggest gains, your biggest breakthroughs, your biggest accomplishments for the year. And I would always say, at least put down 10. Okay. Try to do 10, because usually the first 3 are commonplace. Anybody could put those on our list. But when we start pushing past 5 and 6 and 7, I have found that some real gems come up that I forgot about. And then after that list, and that takes a little bit of time, after that list is formed, take time to acknowledge them. That really did happen. By the grace of God, I was able to do that. God enabled me to do that, and appreciate them and express gratitude to God, right? Because in him we live and move and have our being, right? So it's of him and through him and to him are all things, so it gives us an opportunity to really give thanks to God, for these movements, these developments in our life, in us, in our ministry. So that can be really, really critical as not just a point of repose for the past, but to build on as we move forward into the future. Then the second question is, list your key breakdowns, disappointments, losses, failures. In this fallen world, we have both, right? We can have gains and we can have losses. We can have accomplishments and we can have disappointments. And the thing is what I learned some years ago working with a coach is I was just so grateful to get beyond the disappointment. I'm glad that's over with. I didn't really benefit from the lessons that I could be learning from that. And so taking time to acknowledge them, what did you want to happen? What actually did happen? And then accepting that before God. It's not only humbling, but it's really beneficial to do that.
And how is it been? Talk to me about the benefit.
Yeah, because I think in my experience, is that when you accept losses and hardships and so on, as the Apostle Paul did and often wrote about, our heart enlarges. We're more sensitive to others who have losses.
Okay.
We're more accepting that life has loss in it, and we're more even keel about it, so that when a loss comes, it doesn't bowl us over entirely. We're able to take it in stride, and I think those things are important in terms of our character development.
Yeah. And I would say for both of those, both the first and the second, it also helps us recognize what does and does not define us as a son or daughter of God. That my wins haven't gained God's favor, and the disappointments or I drop the ball doesn't sideline me from his goodness and grace.
That's such an important
because
point.
we live our lives, if we don't reflect, we can easily believe our fantasy press that goes on in our own minds to think, yeah, we're doing great, or we're total wash-ups. We're not accomplishing anything, depending on which end of the idol that we want to worship. So
I'm so glad you said that. So important. And then as you go through those, your list from question 1 and then your list from question 2, and having prayed those, then to really like push back from that and consider, what are the lessons that emerge from this? What do I want to gain from this? Before the Lord, what do I want to look to God in faith about regarding these, and either carry into the next year, or build upon, and it can set you up for. I remember just last year doing this with a couple of clients, and then in January collecting this all and looking at, okay, so now what are your goals for the year? And they said things like, if I hadn't done this, I would have just set the same goals as I did last year. Rewind, push play again, because I didn't do some of the things that I want to do, so maybe I'll just try it again. And that doesn't necessarily gather up lessons. So they were able to decide, what, it was a bad goal last year, so I'm not going to do that again, but I'm going to take the lessons from that and apply them into this new year.
Yeah. Well, good. And then what happens?
So then going on to the next slide, we can look ahead into the coming year. And this first one is really helpful. Just spend 10 minutes, pen to paper, no pause, not too much, just sort of free flow, and write from this starting line. My deepest desire for next year is. And often we go to work, our minds go to our work, and there's nothing wrong with that, but consider, what you want in your life overall. I work with quite a few people, and I've had issue with myself falling into burnout. And one of the insights that I gained was my ministry was kind of this whale that was in a bathtub, basically. And then my life, I tried to fit my life around that whale. And I realized that's completely wrong. God actually cares about my life, right? And my ministry is a part of it. So my ministry is a slice of my life, but it is not my life. And it should not be a whale in the bathtub.
That's a great image. Yes. Of the whale in the bathtub. I like that.
So particularly for those of us in ministry, we can get lost in that. And so to think about how does your work fit into the bigger picture of your life, but to think more in terms of my life. What do I want my life to be? What does the Lord want my life to be, and me to be in this new year.
Good.
And then from there, listing some of the wins, gains, and breakthroughs you want to see and are looking to God for in the coming year. And then what are the goals and outcomes for next year that you're seeking and trusting God for in your personal life and in your professional life? Maybe a new initiative that you're trying to make in your personal life, a diet and exercise regime, or a new initiative at the church to reach out more thoughtfully and caringly to the community, something like that.
And now, how much are looking back and looking forward self-referencing? So, if you had these wins and breakthroughs in the past, so if I'm asking this rightly, when we're looking to the future, do they need to be connected either as wins or breakthroughs, or at least to draw a line? Same thing with the goals and outcomes. Does that make sense? I'm trying to.
So let me make sure I got you. So you're wondering, is there a direct connection between those from one year to the next?
I'm not thinking there has to be. Should there be? Could there be? Is it healthy to know these are my wins, these are my disappointments last year? As I go into this year, I don't want to keep doing the same thing. So if I did not succeed in doing some of the things I was setting out to, let me put it this way. Sometimes it's easy for me to say, here are my goals for 2022. It's the end of 20. Oh, I didn't get them. In 2023, I'll just transfer, I'll cut and paste. That tells me I haven't learned anything unless
Correct.
I have some line of connection. It didn't work because of these things that led up to it. That gets back to not just the action at the end, it's the steps leading to it.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's well said. And I would add to that then the question becomes, is this still important? And if it's still important, what lessons am I taking with me so I'm not in the same spot at the end of next year?
Right.
Because if you do the same thing again, we'll have the same conversation a year from now, right?
Yeah.
And you might get despondent or discouraged unnecessarily.
Yeah, that's the old saying. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
Yes.
And I felt like that sometimes is called ministry, but there you go. That's it is. If I preach the sermon now, they'll change. I'm going, okay, maybe not. Maybe.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Any questions emerging at this point?
Yeah, those listening in, please send us any questions you have in the Q&A or chat box. Love to hear what your thoughts are in all of this.
Did we answer your question, Keenan? What process do you go through when you set aside times to reflect?
I mean, I know for me, and I don't do it the way I'd like to, because I don't think through some of these things. I like doing this at the end of a day, and it's not going to be huge, but to say, okay, I want to be done at 5 or at 5:30. I want to stop what I'm doing. No emails, no, trying to wrap stuff up. I want to stop and think, okay, I've got my list, my to-do list, or I have it over there. If you have an action planner type of thing, did I check it off? My wife is the queen of list making and crossing things off. She writes it in pen, she crosses off in pencil, and she'll even at the end of the day add things to the list to cross them off that she forgot to add, just to say I did this. So and so for me, I'll take that time at the end of the day and just go, okay. And so when I'm beginning the next day, what needs to go on the list? I'll even start thinking, what do I have to think for tomorrow?
Yeah.
And if it was the same, if I didn't get to it on today, why didn't I get to it? And so I'll go, yeah, because I am an unhealthy email responder. Because that's the way it should be. I'm a high relational person. People say, I've heard people say, only answer email in a 20-minute segment your entire day. That's all you're allotted to read and answer email. those of you that know me, if you send me an email, I'll probably get back to you somewhere in the nature of 30 seconds, 45 if I'm busy. And that's not always healthy. So sometimes I have to go, I must block time out and stop. I'm an immediate responder. Because again, that whole process, I've realized I do that because I'm a people pleaser. I don't want people to think poorly of me and that they think I like them, because I do. And I'm going, but that's not going to give me my reflections, because that's not what's really happening there. Something else is.
So, Chris, what would you say? What's one of the key benefits of you using that reflective point at the end of the day?
One is, and my wife's noticed this, my office now in the last 5 years, I've been out of parish context doing this work. It's my office is in the basement of the house. So I'll come up from the dungeon and she'll, how was your day? I didn't get anything done. You know, I was answering everybody's email, you know, probably, but who knows? It helps me to go, no, I did. These were the wins. This is where I succeeded. I do get stuff done. So it does. It helps give me a better perspective on my productivity, because especially in the context of ministry, we don't get anything done. We don't finish anything until we're finished, until the race is complete and we've crossed the line and we're going home. So, you know, I think doing this kind of reflection helps us recognize, by God's grace, we're wrapping things up, not perfectly. It's still a fallen world. And that's the disappointments and the accomplishments, to recognize, if I think that I really can do this to perfection, then I've just believed a horrible lie that will eat me alive. That I've got to be willing to accept the disappointments, because, you know, Christ is on his throne, but this isn't heaven. You know, the consummation hasn't come.
That's good. The two benefits I've noticed for myself, the first is that it helps me to actually leave go of work and enter rest and family life or whatever it is that's next. And the other is it actually puts a little wind under my wings for the next day, so that I feel like I've accomplished something, and that I can do this thing called life, you know.
Yep. Yeah.
I'm not a complete failure, you know.
Now, we have two more questions. Sean is asking, as a pastor, where would I go for good personal coaching or mentoring? What is the typical cost? Vincent, do you have any openings? So maybe you don't have any thoughts there. Next question. Oh, no, I think you do, Vincent, on there.
I do coach pastors. Do I have any openings? We can have a call and talk about it for sure. I think Chris will post. I offer a free 30-minute discovery call just to kind of see, is coaching the thing that you really want? Am I the person for you? Is this the right time? And so on. And cost varies on, amount of length of engagement, frequency of meetings, things like that. Yeah. The
thing I think to recognize, it's out there, and part of what we're doing here with this and in other ways is to normalize this whole process. As pastors, and it's only been made worse, but it's always been the case, we can be a lonely bunch, especially if we're a solo pastor and we're in a place where we don't have peers we get together with on a regular basis. And you need coaching in that context too, but I think especially now, to be able to have someone who's outside of our circle, to be able to listen, hear, ask those good questions, speak into is absolutely vital, and for all of us in so many ways.
And I noticed an old friend of mine, Chris Bauer, is on the call and said, it's good to see me. Well, I can't see you, but it's good to know you're here, Chris. And the question you asked is, how do you remind yourself to be intentional about doing this each day? I just put it right in my calendar. Just like I have a work day startup ritual, I have an end of the day ritual, and that it cues me to do it doesn't have to be long, 5-7 minutes, of reflection. It doesn't have to be an hour. Could be a real short appointment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. Paul asks, any recommended reading on the practice of reflection?
Let me think about that. I don't know of any. Do you, Chris?
Oh, it's kind of embarrassing. I usually come up with a list of books I'll send along. After this is all done, the videotape link will be sent to you, and Vinny's contact information and such. And then always usually some reading. I didn't reflect. See here, let's reflect, Vinny. What went well? The conversation was great. What could we improve on? We should come up with a list of articles or books in this section. Right. So that needs improvement.
There was one that I referenced in the PowerPoint, but the title of the book, I've not read the book, so I can't recommend it per se. But I know David Peterson was a contributor.
Yeah, so that's the DNA of VCUA, framework for building learning agility.
Yeah, VUCA is the new catchphrase for the world we're living in now. Volatile, what is it? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and what's the A stand for?
Anxious, maybe.
Could be anxious. I can't.
Yeah,
I'm not sure, but.
I'll include that book. Again, it's not going to, I would assume, and not meant as a judgment, but it's not actually going to be a gospel-centered Christian perspective.
No.
It's going to be, but the analysis of the world in which we live, I think it can be there. Yeah, and there are a lot of good leadership books along that line of aspect of leadership agility. How do we respond leading differently? A lot of the work that comes out of it. I'll send some of this of Generations, Friedman's work on issues of anxiety, things like that. It's not so much, it's reflection because it helps us see who we are and some of those processes.
Yeah. There is one book that comes to mind. It's by Keith Webb. It's more of a workbook. And what is the name of it? I'll find it.
Yeah,
and I'll send it to you, Chris.
But Philip mentions True Spirituality by Francis Schaeffer. Perhaps that one.
That's a fantastic book.
Yeah. I mean, there are Eugene Peterson. Some of his work, I think, helps us in those areas. Certainly, Scazzaro on the issue of emotional intelligence and spiritual health.
Right,
can get us to that point. But yeah, well, we'll probably send a few links along and think about some others. But we've come to the end of our time. I appreciate it very much for all of you joining us and for the questions, the interaction. Again, we'll be sending the links out to you and the information. Feel free to, as always, we always record these episodes, and they're available on the YouTube page and also posted on the M&A website. Feel free to share that link with anybody and everybody. This might be a good conversation to have with your sessions. And how not only for me to do it, but as a session and as each elders to engage in that process, and to see maybe there's some benefit of having, again, a coach, someone outside to help work with individual, but also the group to think through some of these things, to be able to ask the questions of the group as a whole. So, well, this will be our final one for 2022. We'll be seeing perhaps more coming up in 2023, and opportunities to keep having these kind of conversations because they really do help us think through who we are, who God has called us to be, and how we are to live. And till then, Lord bless. Take care.